It began with panic. On a December morning in 1994, the streets of Mexico City were filled with something invisible but contagious: fear. People crowded in front of banks, clutching their savings books, hoping to withdraw dollars before it was too late. Headlines screamed from newspapers: El Peso se desploma. The peso collapses. In a matter of days, the currency of one of Latin America's most promising nations had lost nearly half its value. Overnight, salaries evaporated, debts doubled, and faith in the Mexican miracle turned into disbelief. But this wasn't a random accident. It was the inevitable consequence of a system built on illusion, a story of political ambition, economic manipulation, and the fragile power of confidence. To understand what happened, you have to rewind a decade. In the 1980s, Mexico was a country recovering from disaster. The oil boom had turned into a debt crisis, inflation had devoured savings, and the peso had already collapsed once before. But by the early 1990s, something changed. The government, led by President Carlos Salinas de Gortari, promised a new era, El Milagro Mexicano, the Mexican miracle. Salinas opened Mexico's markets, privatized state companies, and signed the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, with the United States and Canada. To the world, Mexico looked like a rising star, a modern economy finally joining the global elite. Foreign investors rushed in. Billions of dollars flowed into Mexican bonds and stocks. Wall Street praised Mexico as the model for Latin American reform. The peso was strong, stable, and, according to Salinas, as good as a dollar. But beneath the shine, something was wrong. The Mexican government had chosen to keep the peso fixed in value against the U.S. dollar, around 3.4 pesos per dollar. It made Mexico look stable, but it was artificial. Every day, the government had to use its reserves of U.S. dollars to defend that value. Meanwhile, inflation in Mexico was higher than in the U.S., meaning the peso was slowly becoming overvalued. Exports weakened. Imports exploded. Mexico was spending more dollars than it earned, but few noticed because foreign money kept coming. By 1993, Mexico had become addicted to external financing. To maintain its illusion of stability, the government issued short-term bonds called tesobonos, debt instruments denominated in pesos but guaranteed in U.S. dollars. It was a clever trick. Investors could earn high Mexican interest rates while feeling safe that their money was tied to the dollar. In reality, Mexico was borrowing dollars it didn't have and promising to repay them with money it couldn't print. Then came 1994, the year everything unraveled. In March, presidential candidate Luis Donaldo Colosio, the symbol of reform and hope, was assassinated during a campaign rally. The event shocked the nation and shattered investor confidence. Political instability began to ripple through financial markets. Foreign investors, the same ones who had once hailed Mexico as a miracle, began pulling their money out. Billions fled the country within weeks. The central bank tried to defend the peso by selling dollars from its reserves, but the losses were enormous. Each day, more people exchanged peso for dollars. Each day, the reserve shrank. By December, the new president, Ernesto Zedillo, had just taken office. He inherited an economy already running on fumes. Facing mounting pressure, his administration made a fateful decision: to devalue the peso by 15%, hoping a controlled adjustment would calm the markets. Instead, it ignited a storm. Investors saw the devaluation not as a solution, but as confirmation that Mexico was broke. Panic spread. Capital fled faster than ever. The peso plunged not by 15%, but by 40% in less than a week. Within days, Mexico's foreign reserves dropped from $30 billion to less than $6 billion. The central bank was nearly bankrupt. The dream of the Mexican miracle had turned into a nightmare. For ordinary Mexicans, the effects were immediate and devastating. Overnight, the cost of imported goods, food, gasoline, medicine, skyrocketed. Inflation surged past 50%. Mortgages, car loans, and credit card debts doubled, since they were tied to the dollar. Middle-class families who believed in the new Mexico suddenly found themselves ruined. Businesses collapsed. Workers lost jobs. Supermarkets began to ration basic products. The government called it a crisis of liquidity. But on the streets, it felt like a crisis reality. For a decade, Mexico had lived on borrowed trust, money from abroad, promises at home, and a belief that modern reforms could erase old problems. But the peso's collapse proved something timeless. Confidence can be printed, but it cannot be sustained. In Washington, alarms went off. U.S. Treasury officials realized the crisis was bigger than Mexico. It threatened to infect global markets. Wall Street was exposed, and American banks held billions in Mexican debt. Within days, President Bill Clinton convened emergency meetings. A bailout package of $50 billion was assembled, not out of generosity, but necessity. If Mexico fell, other emerging economies might follow. The world's financial system couldn't afford another domino. But that would come later. For now, in December 1994, Mexico was frozen between two realities: the illusion of the past decade and the reckoning of the next. On paper, the country had joined the global elite. In truth, it had built its prosperity on borrowed money and political hope. When confidence cracked, the entire structure fell apart. And yet, what makes the story of the peso collapse truly haunting is not how it fell, but how easily it could have been prevented. Because Mexico didn't run out of gold, oil, or industry. It ran out of faith. Faith in its government. Faith in its currency. Faith in the story it had told itself. If you've ever wondered how nations go bankrupt while their cities still sparkle and their politicians still smile, remember this. Money collapses not when numbers run out, but when belief does. And in 1994, Mexico learned that lesson the hard way. By early 1995, Mexico was a country in freefall. Prices had doubled, businesses were closing daily, and the peso's value was evaporating faster than anyone could print new notes. What had begun as a financial crisis now threatened to become a political one, the kind that topples governments and rewrites history. In the capital, panic turned into anger. Middle-class families who had borrowed in dollars to buy homes or cars suddenly owed twice as much. Imports became luxury items. Gasoline, milk, even tortillas were now symbols of frustration. The Mexican miracle had died, and its ghost haunted every supermarket shelf. But beyond Mexico's borders, something larger was unfolding, a crisis that could drag the global economy down with it. In Washington, D.C., the mood was urgent. American banks were heavily exposed to Mexican debt. Wall Street firms had poured billions into short-term tesobonos, convinced the Mexican government could never default. Now, with the peso in collapse, that assumption looked naive. If Mexico failed to pay, it wouldn't just sink its own economy. It could trigger a chain reaction across emerging markets. President Bill Clinton, barely 2 years into office, faced a nightmare. He'd campaigned on domestic renewal, not foreign bailouts. Yet his advisors warned that inaction could cause a financial contagion that would reach American shores. Behind closed doors, Treasury Secretary Robert Rubin and Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan briefed Clinton. If Mexico collapses, so does investor confidence in the developing world. This isn't about charity, it's about survival. Clinton made his decision. In February 1995, the United States organized a historic rescue, a $50 billion bailout package, funded by the U.S., the International Monetary Fund, and other global institutions. But it wasn't without controversy. Many in Congress opposed the plan. Why, they asked, should American taxpayers save Mexico from its own mistakes? Clinton bypassed them, using emergency executive powers. It's not just Mexico's economy, he said in a televised address. It's America's future. The bailout came with strict conditions. Mexico had to slash spending, raise interest rates, and guarantee repayment with oil revenues, effectively mortgaging its most valuable resource to its northern neighbor. For the Mexican people, the rescue felt more like a foreign takeover. Overnight, austerity measures hit hard. Public salaries were frozen. Subsidies disappeared. Small businesses folded. Unemployment soared. The peso stabilized, but at a devastating social cost. Yet for all its pain, the bailout worked, at least on paper. Within a year, financial markets calmed. By 1996, the peso had found a new equilibrium, and Mexico began repaying its debts ahead of schedule. The Clinton administration declared victory, calling it a model for crisis management. But behind that polished narrative lay a deeper transformation. Mexico had traded sovereignty for stability. The same reforms that made it look modern, free markets, foreign capital, and deregulation, had also made it vulnerable. Its economy was now tied not to its own productivity, but to global sentiment. Confidence had replaced gold. And once again, confidence had proven fragile. For millions of Mexicans, the crisis left scars that never healed. A generation of middle-class families saw their savings wiped out. Students abandoned universities to support their families. Small shop owners went bankrupt. Many migrated north, crossing into the United States not out of ambition, but desperation. In less than a year, poverty levels jumped from 52% to 70%. The peso crisis had turned into a human crisis. For economists, it became a case study, the first great collapse of a globalized emerging market. For ordinary citizens, it was a reminder that financial stability can vanish faster than truth in politics. The Tequila Crisis, as it came to be known, didn't stay in Mexico. It sent shockwaves through Argentina, Brazil, and Asia as investors suddenly realized how interconnected global finance had become. In Thailand, Indonesia, and South Korea, similar bubbles, fueled by foreign capital and fixed exchange rates, were already forming. When they burst in 1997, analysts pointed back to Mexico as the warning that had gone unheeded. The pattern was clear. Governments promised stability, investors believed them, and when faith broke, entire nations fell. The peso collapse wasn't just an economic story. It was the birth of a global cycle of financial faith and betrayal. But in Mexico itself, the crisis reshaped politics. The ruling party, the PRI, had dominated for 7 decades, presenting itself as the guardian of order and progress. After 1994, that illusion cracked. The party's reputation as the architect of prosperity was gone. Its monopoly on power would soon follow. By 2000, Mexico elected its first opposition president in modern history, Vicente Fox, ending 71 years of one-party rule. The roots of that political revolution lay in the ashes of the peso. The people had learned that political promises could be as inflated as currency. In retrospect, the 1994 peso collapse wasn't just about economics. It was about belief, the same invisible currency that backs every note, every stock, every promise. For 10 years, Mexico had built a story that had tamed chaos, joined modernity, and earned the world's trust. Investors believed it. Citizens believed it. Even the government believed it. Until one week in December, when reality intervened. The peso didn't collapse because Mexico was poor. It collapsed because the story that sustained it, the myth of endless stability, could no longer be maintained. Money at its core is not about numbers. It's about faith. And faith, once lost, cannot be devalued, only abandoned. Today, economists still debate who was to blame. Some blame Salinas for borrowing too much. Others blame Zedillo for mishandling the devaluation. Others still blame Wall Street for feeding the illusion of safety. But the truth lies somewhere deeper. Mexico became a mirror for the modern world, a world where nations build prosperity not on gold or grain, but on confidence, and where that confidence can vanish in a single headline. The peso collapse of 1994 was a warning that remains painfully relevant, because every financial system, no matter how sophisticated, is only as strong as the faith of those who believe in it. And if that faith breaks again, no bailout will be large enough to stop the fall. So when you hear about stability, growth, and reforms, remember Mexico in 1994. Remember the day faith failed.